Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is The Warriors by Sol Yurick. Now, The Warriors was published in 1965, and this is very loosely based on the classic Greek story Anabaxis, and this book was also the basis for the 1979 Walter Hill film, The Warriors, and this edition of the book that I have is the movie tie-in edition, because this cover here is of course the poster for the movie. Now, the movie The Warriors is a billion times different from this book, but I'll address some of the differences between the movie and the book at the end of this review. Now, the plot of The Warriors is it begins where this character named Ismael Rivera, I think I'm saying his name right, who's the leader of the largest gang in New York City, he has this plan to essentially bring all the gangs in New York City together, so he organizes this huge meeting in the Bronx, pretty much between every gang in the city. So, long story short, during this meeting, things start going awry, like things start going to hell when enemy gangs start fighting, and then of course the police start showing up, and pretty much the whole meeting turns to chaos, and this guy Ismael ends up getting shot and killed. So after all this happens, the novel primarily focuses on a gang called the Coney Island Dominators, who are of course from Coney Island, and throughout the book they're trying to get home, and they're trying to survive the night and trying to survive against enemy gangs and the police and stuff like that. And throughout the story, a member of this gang is reading this comic book, which is a comic book version of the Greek story Anabaxis, and as he reads the comic book, you start to see the parallels between that story and what's actually happening to these main characters in the book. And that's the basic plot line of The Warriors. Now, I thought The Warriors was a very interesting book, and it's actually a really brutal and disturbing book, and this book really is disturbing, and in this book you really don't have anybody to root for, because pretty much all these main characters are scumbags, pretty much. Like, they're really bad people. Like, there's a scene in this book where they gang rape a girl, and there's also a scene in this book where they really brutally murder this one guy, really for just looking at one of the gang members wrong. So these are not good kids, but at the same time though, the book does paint a very three-dimensional picture of these characters. Even though these characters really aren't good people, the book still paints them as being very three-dimensional characters. Now, the book does seem to be a commentary on juvenile delinquency, because all these characters are teenagers, like they're young kids pretty much, and I heard some people compare this book to Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, and I could definitely see the comparisons. Actually, this book reminded me quite a bit of A Clockwork Orange. The book also seems to be kind of a commentary on the mob mentality, because pretty much the whole reason everything starts going to shit in this book is really because of a misunderstanding. Like, in the book it describes that pretty much the only reason that meeting went to hell was because gangs started fighting because of a little misunderstanding, and really the book seems to be almost a commentary on the mob mentality. Now, the book also seems to touch on themes like sexuality. Like, in this book, you realize that these characters are very, very misogynistic. Like, they hate women, and they say a lot of really sexist shit in this book, and you realize that being masculine, like, their masculinity is, like, the most important thing in the world to these characters. So the book really does touch on themes like sexuality, and it also touches on themes like reputation, because you realize their reputation is also very important to them. Now, even though these characters are bad people, there is one character in the book named Hinton who really is the character who you kind of root for the most, because in the book you really do realize that he really does kind of want to get out of this lifestyle. Now, as I said, in the book there's this one character who is reading this comic book, and you start to see the parallels between what is actually happening to these characters and what is happening to the characters in the comic book that this kid is reading, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of Alan Moore's Watchmen, because in Watchmen there was a character who was reading a comic book, and you started to see parallels between what was happening in the world of Watchmen and what was happening in the comic book that that character in Watchmen was reading. And Watchmen was written like over 20 years after this book was written, so I wouldn't be surprised if Alan Moore maybe got some inspiration for Watchmen from this book. But yeah, The Warriors is a really good book. I highly recommend it, but the book is very brutal and very disturbing, so it might not be for everybody, but if it sounds like it's up your alley, then I would definitely recommend it. Now I want to talk about the 1979 film adaptation of The Warriors. Now, the movie The Warriors was directed by Walter Hill, and I personally love the movie. Like, it's one of my favorite movies, and I will admit I've seen the movie before I read the book, and it really was the movie that got me interested in reading the book. But the movie is a billion times different from the book. Like, one of the major differences between the book and the movie is, in the movie, the characters, the gang is not called the Coney Island Dominators. In the movie, the gang is called the Warriors. Now, in the book, the term Warriors is meant to refer to all gang members, but in the movie, they just called the gang the Warriors. Also, in the movie, you actually really like those characters, while in the book the characters are complete scumbags. In the movie, you actually really root for the characters, even though the characters are still gang members and still aren't necessarily good people. In the movie, though, you actually really care about the characters, while in the book the characters are scumbags. Also, in the movie, the character of Ismael is called Cyrus, which I believe is actually a reference to the Greek story Anabaxis, which The Warriors is loosely based on. Also, in the movie, there's this character named Luther, who is the main villain of the movie, played by David Patrick Kelly, who's actually one of my favorite movie villains, but that character is not in the book. He was a character who was added for the movie. Also, the movie The Warriors was very over-the-top and very comic book-ish. Like, Walter Hill actually intended The Warriors to essentially be like a live-action comic book. And the movie The Warriors, it definitely has a very comic book feel to it, while the book is a lot more reality-based. Now, the movie The Warriors was also very controversial when it came out, and my dad actually saw that movie in the theaters back when it came out in 1979, and he was only a kid when that movie came out, and he said after he came out of the theater, there was like a huge riot, and when my grandmother, his mother, came to pick him up, my grandmother said to him, "What the hell kind of movie did you just go see?" But yeah, even though the movie version of The Warriors is a billion times different from the book, I still really enjoy that movie, but I also recommend reading the book as well. So yeah, that's my review on The Warriors by Sol Yurick, and bye.